What are the waters above? Is it the home of the angels and the righteous dead? Can you give your definition of the firmament and the primum mobile? This is a very good question. So, just to be straightforward and candid, I personally strongly doubt that the universe is expanding. Not saying I reject it, I doubt it. This relates to the question on cosmic inflation. Inflationary cosmology, so far as I can tell, is an idea which is developed essentially solely to deal with an ad hoc problem with conventional cosmology. Now, it should be clear, the Big Bang, the evidence that is presented for Big Bang cosmology, I think is genuinely related to the reconstruction of the history of the cosmos. Okay, so it's not a step in the wrong direction. It's a step in the right direction. What is younger, 13.7 billion years, or an infinite amount of time? Well, it's 13.7 billion. I think advocates of Big Bang cosmology have come to this conclusion in part because of genuine evidence that is innately related to the fact that the universe had a beginning. But there's a problem with the reconstruction, and it is that some stars are too far away given the age of the universe. In other words, they are older or farther away in terms of light years than the universe is old in terms of years. Now, this is an argument that is very often used against young age cosmology. And I agree in the sense that I don't think the explanation, which shows how the universe is 6,000 years old, at least in terms of terrestrial clock, I don't think that the explanation of how you have light years or stars which are farther away than the universe is old has been discovered. The problem is when you try to use that as an argument against young age creation and in favor of the alternative. Because qualitatively speaking, the same problem exists, which is that there are celestial bodies which are something like 20 billion light years away. Well, the universe is 13.7 billion years old. And what that indicates is that there is something about theoretical physics, about the history of the cosmos, that we simply do not understand. The fact that at the heart of theoretical physics, there is this huge tension or self-contradiction, which is that the laws of gravitation do not seem to be compatible with the laws of quantum mechanics. I think it is foolish to confidently reconstruct the history of the cosmos based on our knowledge of theoretical physics, when in fact, we know for a fact that at the heart of theoretical physics, there is some black box. We don't know how these things are unified. We do not know how much we don't know and what that will change down the stream. Another problem is that when you look into the heavens, it does not seem that the farther away celestial bodies are indicative of what you would expect from the early universe, according to conventional cosmology. Okay, so I say that as a preface to what I'm about to say about the structure of the cosmos writ large. There is good evidence that the Earth, relative to the size of the cosmos, and by the way, in antiquity, everyone knew the cosmos was huge. I think it's Ptolemy who says that the Earth, relative to the cosmos as a whole, relative to the heavens, is the size of a mathematical point. In other words, we're tiny in spatial terms. The evidence seems to be reasonable to very good that that our solar system, our galaxy, is close to the center of the cosmos. Assuming we have a spatially bounded cosmos, it's close to the center of the cosmos, relative at least to the size of the cosmos as a whole. Okay, so there are kind of two planks in this argument, and neither of them are knocked down, but both of them are reasonable to good. Okay, first is the notion of quantized redshift. So as light comes into our sphere of vision, it it shifts red to a degree corresponding, according to our present understanding, of the distance of stars from the Earth. Now, quantized redshift is a possible observation. It has been disputed, but it is a possible observation that stars seem to be distributed in terms of concentric circles. In other words, it's not just random throughout. There are concentric circles, spheres of stars. Now, this is quite striking to me because we know from direct observation that this system, this kind of structure, concentric circles around a center, it's a very common one in the world. It's the structure of the atom. You've got nucleus, and you have various circles which are centered on the nucleus. The solar system. Okay, you've got the sun surrounded by concentric circles of planets, which send waves throughout the gravitational field. Galaxy. Galaxy has a galactic center, and you have spiral formation. So it's unsurprising. It would be unsurprising if, in fact, the entire universe was structured as the Milky Way galaxy, our galactic cluster, somewhere near the center, and it is ringed by concentric circles of celestial matter. That's not the same thing as geocentrism. What is conventionally meant by that? Geocentrism, conventionally understood, means that the Earth is at the absolute center of the cosmos and that the sun revolves around it. Now, we have to be clear that when someone talks about geocentrism, actually, they are not necessarily saying that the conventional theory of gravitation is wrong. Because when we talk about one body revolving around another body, we generally mean that in terms of scientific parlance. We mean that the more massive body exerts a larger gravitational influence on the less massive body than vice versa. But in terms of motion, that is the change in spatial location from one moment to the next, in terms of motion, the principle of relativity, which is back, we're older than Einstein, it's older than the theory of relativity. Principle of relativity says, in terms of empirical measurements, there are movements, there are changes of one body in relation to other bodies. You cannot measure absolute motion. If there is such a thing as absolute motion, all that would mean is a thing that moves with respect to the outer edge of the cosmos. So that I hope tackles the geocentrism question as well. Now, to return to the question of the waters above. Genesis 1 says that God created the heavens and the earth. The heavens is the throne room of God, the angels, all of that. The earth is a formless, void, and dark mass of water. And I say that because we hear immediately that the Spirit hovered over the surface of the waters, and then in the second creation day, God splits water from water. Now, some people would say, well, this is ad hoc because we know that in the Near East, people saw the waters above as simply being the cosmic ocean, which is outside of the shell, which is why the sky looks blue. But, I mean, the evidence for that, and some people may well have believed that, but the evidence of that depends on the very same phrases that are present in Scripture. So it's not as if Near Eastern context, by and large, gives us an additional data point telling us the way in which this language was interpreted. The language that is used of cosmology in antiquity, one should hesitate before interpreting what a particular person took that to mean, because this language is customary. Okay, so it's old liturgical language. The same kind of language is used all across the ancient world. In Mesoamerica, the Maya speak of heaven, earth, waters under the earth. Same thing in the Near East. Heaven, earth, waters under the earth. Exodus chapter 20. Don't make an image of those which are in heaven, on earth, or under the earth. So this language is very old. And if the language is very old, it's quite likely that the form of the words, that is the actual kind of grammatical structure, the specific phrases that are used, are being transmitted according to the principle of continuity with past tradition. But the same words may well have been interpreted differently and in contradictory ways by different people. I think the governing principle, though, in understanding cosmological language, not only in the Bible, not only in the Near East, but across the ancient world, is that it is meant to capture the idea of the world as a house. So how is it that the world could be a circle and have four corners? The four corners of the earth are a reference to the earth as a temple, an architectural dwelling place for God. God dwells in the earth. It has four corners. Also, in Ezekiel, God moves at exact right angles. And so does the prophet Ezekiel when the Spirit fills him. The temple and the tabernacle have exact angles. Why? Because God always acts according to a precisely delineated and totally fulfilled purpose. God knows exactly why he's doing what he's doing. He moves at exact right angles. There's never any imprecision. And the creation, being glorified, is described as having these kinds of right angles. So in terms of objective physical reality, how is the universe structured? I would say this. The best shot we have at understanding what the waters above actually are in biblical cosmology is to look at the structure of the temple and the tabernacle. So we have to be very, very careful because we have a complicated relationship between symbolic language and the concrete reality of the world. Because to use symbolic language is to say the particular material reality is itself innately symbolic. So you have in the holy place, you got a menorah with 7 branches. Well, that represents the sun, the moon, and the 5 moving stars, which are the 5 planets visible with the naked eye. And that represents, in turn, the entire commonwealth of celestial bodies, each of which is governed by an archangel who moves it through the heavens by communicating God's creative and sustaining power to it. Now, obviously, concretely speaking, there really are 7 such bodies, that is, heavenly bodies that are visible with the naked eye. So it has a concrete implication, but obviously they are not literally candles. Candlelight and the heavenly bodies, they share qualities which make them analogous in the purpose and mind of God, and thus which make them symbolically analogous in the system of the tabernacle and the temple. Take a look at the structure of the tabernacle and the temple. Okay? Some people say that in antiquity, there was no distinction, or in scripture at least, there was no distinction between the heaven of heavens, that is where God lives, where God fills everything with his presence, and the visible heavens, that is what we see in the stars. And they refer to references to the stars as living beings. Now, I would say, number one, if we're not materialists with respect to the mind, why precisely do we think that that has been undermined, that the stars are living beings? Not saying they are in terms of being conscious. I'm just saying we have to think about the justification for this, because modern science has done nothing to refute that. If it is to be refuted, it's refuted at present on the basis of revelation and Christian philosophy, not on the sciences. Think about if you were an external mind, which was not in a biological form, and you were shown a brain, you would have no reason at all. No reason at all. If you were not privy to our mode of communication, you'd have no reason to associate that brain, which is suffused with electromagnetic currents and activity. No reason to associate that with conscious life. But I think that the stars are, in fact, governed by their respective archangels, their archons. And I think the relationship of each star to the intelligence governing it is something like the relationship of a robe to a body. A robe naturally is shaped for the specific body it enrobes. When a person moves in his body, he moves with the robe along with it. Nevertheless, the robe is not the same thing as the body. So I think, let's just say, St. Michael the Archangel, the archon of the sun. God sustains the sun, being what it is, through his creative energies. He creates the world as an imprint of the divine Logos, the second person of the Trinity, in whom God thinks all thoughts about himself. And the sun thus has the qualities it does in virtue of God's creation of it, as a particular kind of imprint of the Logos. One of the ways in which God imprints himself on the world is by the creation of living, intelligent persons with wills. And just as the Father is always acting in the Son through the Spirit, just as every act is an act of communion and cooperation, so also, I think at every level of the creation, there are intelligent, personal beings who share in the creative and sustaining energies of God, and thus are the proximate cause for the motion of the heavenly bodies. Now, someone might say, well, wouldn't the motion of the heavenly bodies be caused by gravity? But this is simply a category error. Gravity is not a cause, it's a description. Okay? Descriptions show us patterns. They show us why one point in time and space relates to the other point in time and space, or rather, they show us in what way they're related. Just, the sun is here, the sun is here. Why does the sun move? Because of gravity? Well, that's not a coherent statement. Gravity is a description. It's like saying that you hear a symphony because of the musical notation. It's just not the same kind of thing. So what is the proximate cause of the motion of heavenly bodies? It is the activity of the archangels who are set over those heavenly bodies. I'm using the word archangel pretty loosely, because their very life, the way that they behave, makes them immediately present to the corresponding heavenly body. And that presence communicates God under a particular aspect. And that particular aspect of God's self-communication in the creation includes, as an intrinsic quality of existence, the pattern of celestial motion that we see in the world. Here's an example. We say the whole world declares the glory of God. I've mentioned this example many times before because I think it's one of the most straightforward and most interesting. The sun is not an after-the-fact analogy to the glory of God. It's not as if God looked at the sun and said, wow, that's a good analogy. He created the sun to declare the glory of Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity. The sun has the qualities that it has in service to that purpose. It declares a particular aspect of God's uncreated life. God as God gives of himself richly to other things. The sun, S-U-N, shines its light, radiates its heat on the world, and communicates energy such that the plants grow, such that we're able to move and not freeze to death. Where was I on this exact train of thought? This happens. Oh, yes. So these qualities, which are in service to the symbolic end, representation of the archetypes, can be expected to have implications. And by the way, I'm going to return to the waters above question. I haven't abandoned that. Might be expected to have implications for the actual physical size of the heavenly bodies. Think about a solar eclipse. Why is the moon structured such that it covers over the sun the way it does? It's not like it's necessary. The moon is of such a size and distance from the Earth that it exactly covers over the sun while allowing the light of the corona of the sun to come through. That is essential for scientific study of the properties of the sun. The only place that you could see a solar eclipse is the place where there are people to see it. But how about other aspects? An objective number is a ratio because the sun is X so many kilograms massive. Well, that depends on how you define a kilogram, right? And you can define a unit of measurement however you want. What's objective is the ratio, because no matter the unit of measurement, the sun will be a certain number of times more massive than the Earth. Well, the traditional solar number is 33. It's really cool. It's 33. Because every 3 years, the lunar calendar and the solar calendar diverge by 33 days. Jesus, he's 33 years old when he ascends into heaven. It's a very well-known example. But solar heroes, because Jesus is, after all, the Son of Righteousness, S-U-N of righteousness, solar heroes are often associated with 33. Well, here's the cool thing. The sun is 333,000 times more massive than the Earth. Now, how in the world did people in antiquity know that? The answer is they didn't. It's that people in antiquity accurately understood certain symbolic aspects of creation, which, when we've studied them in more detail, have turned out to be true. The sun's symbolic relationship to those archetypes, which are present in the number 33, or its multiples, or 333,000. That relationship is not just something we thought up. It's not some cute bit of poetry. It is, after a fashion, poetry, but that's because poetry itself is understood to be elegant because it captures something genuine about certain patterns of existence in the world. I don't know I forgot what relation that had to the firmament question. But to give you the straight answer on the firmament, just very shortly, very direct, I believe that the waters above are the boundary of the physical cosmos. That are they're made of water. It's made of water, whether it's ice or liquid. I've heard. I think it's Danny Faulkner. He has a lecture on this. I can't speak to its legitimacy, because I think out of all scientific disciplines, astronomy, cosmology, that really requires the most technical know-how to get a basic grasp of. But he is, professionally credentialed, if I recall his name correctly. He suggests that the cosmic microwave background radiation has something to do with the waters above the heavens. Okay, so waters above the heavens, that's the boundary of the creation. Above it is the heaven of heavens, where God fills it all with his presence. People say, well, is heaven of heavens a physical place? Well, after a fashion, it is. Jesus ascends. This is not just a parable or an image. He ascends, but he also passes into the heaven of heavens when he passes above the clouds. I think there is a kind of interconnectedness to heavenly space, God's heaven, the heaven of heavens, and terrestrial space that is more complicated than simple up and down. In other words, I think that they are tied together in complicated knots. Take, for example, the traditional imagery of 7 heavens. Those 7 heavens correspond to the 7 planets, the traditional planets. Luna, that's the moon. Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Now, these are conceived of as the 7 celestial spheres. And indeed, the relationships that they have mathematically with each other do have quite powerful symbolic values. But I don't think it's just a parable. I think that there is a genuine ontological relationship between various degrees of heavenly space and various degrees of space in the stellar heavens, the heaven with the star. They're wrapped together in some way. They're knotted together. Whether or not general relativity is ultimately true, I suspect it captures an aspect of the truth. And this is, if you look at Lee Smolin's book, The Trouble with Physics, you'll find lots of interesting stuff about various degrees of alternative physical theories. But it gives good images for what could be true. at least possibly. Okay, these various alternative or various mathematically coherent descriptions of the laws of physics essentially are ways of cashing out the different ways in which the world could exist. So I mentioned last time the Kaluza-Klein model of electromagnetism conceives of just as gravity's is supposed to occur in 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. The Kaluza-Klein model suggests that electromagnetism happens in a 5th dimension, that the behavior of things in relation to this 5th dimension is what produces phenomena that we identify as electromagnetism. Now, the empirical data seems to refute that, but that's how the one way the world could exist. So even if general relativity turned out not to be true, I think we have a good image of the kinds of relations that perhaps are analogous to these higher order relations between the heaven of heavens and the visible heavens. I'm not going to pull the whole cliche of taking a piece of paper, folding it, and then sticking a pencil through it. I mean, it's hard to imagine a single television show which hasn't used that image, but it's quite an interesting relation, and I think it's possible that something analogous to that is relevant to the relation of the heaven of heavens to the visible heavens. But this is complementary to the straightforward up-down relation. Is heaven up? Well, I think it is up. If you move out to the edge of the cosmos, I think you would eventually reach a boundary, and I think beyond that boundary is where God fills that whole realm. After all, he's going to fill this one the same way. Heaven and earth, they dwell in each other in the world to come. So clearly, it's not incoherent with the notion of spatial existence, though it's quite possible that we simply don't have the language at this point, or even in principle, that we simply don't have the language to describe the kinds of spatial threads binding these things together. So the firmament is not the waters above. Okay? We're told in the Psalm of the waters above the heavens. Now you have to remember that there are 2 distinct areas, for lack of a better word, that are called heaven. And they're sometimes named in the same context. So this isn't just an ad hoc way of trying to read Christianity back into people who thought that the stars were gods. So by gods, we just mean spiritual intelligences of great exaltation, and in fact, there are angels who dwell in the various heavenly bodies and move them. If you point to the star and say, that's the Archangel Michael, it depends on what you mean by that. You know, if you point to somebody and they're wearing clothes, you say, oh, that's seraphim. Would you say, no, you're wrong, those are his clothes, those aren't seraphim? No, the clothes both express and conceal the reality. By the same token, I think the sun, S-U-N, is something like the robe or garment of the Archangel Michael. I think the moon is something like the robe or garment of Gabriel. But in 1 Kings 8, we are told of God's presence. Heaven and highest heaven cannot contain him. In Colossians 1:15, we're told that all things in heaven and on earth were made through Christ. And what is the heaven? Well, he then describes various categories of angels. Psalm 104, we are given a poetic recapitulation of the creation days. And each successive literary slot tells us something about the creation days. The first slot shows us what is actually meant by the heaven of Genesis 1:1, because mentions he makes his ministers spirits, his angels are a flame of fire. It is on the second day of creation that God separates waters above from waters below, and the area between the waters above and the waters below is called heaven, or the firmament. Okay, so it's the waters above are above the firmament, are above the heaven. They are the boundary between the heaven of heavens and the heavens. So that's what I think the waters above are.